Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to try and raise the level of my voice. I've also included in this presentation, it's going to be rather a lot of slides, but I'll go through them quickly, and we will put it on the Global Network website at some stage, so you can always get it from there. I wanted to include here not only about the installations, but also about the military exercises that the US and NATO hold too regularly in Europe and in Scandinavia, because these are all adding to the aggressive stance that the West is taking against Russia and China, and Russia in particular in this case. So I wanted to look. In the UK, we hardly ever talk about NATO. I don't know, maybe it's probably different in Russia, but in the States, I don't know whether you discuss NATO an awful lot or not, but it doesn't happen so much in Europe. It's kind of there, but nobody really challenges it too much. The challenge is building, but not so much. So I want to say a little bit about the way NATO has expanded, and the US and NATO military exercises in Europe and Scandinavia. Then there's also a problem now with the militarization of the European Union. The European Union was set up basically as an establishment to bring states together, but now it's becoming militarized. And I want to make sure that you realize that, you know that. And then the role of space technology in all this, and this whole global data gathering system and the challenges that offers as well. So if we start with NATO, it's not just the core NATO members who are involved in NATO. The core members of the 12 founding members, including the UK, the US, and members of, they're France, Italy, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Norway, and Denmark and Iceland were the original, and Canada. Did I mention Canada? Were among the founding members of NATO in 1949. But also, in particular, I want to highlight, unfortunately Agneta Norberg can't be with us, but she'd be saying a lot more about the role of the Nordic countries in all of this, and I'll try and bring some of that in. Sweden and Finland in particular, with their long traditions of neutrality and preference for diplomacy, had for a long time distanced themselves from the main military centres of Europe. But now in 1994, both of those countries joined NATO's so-called Partnership for Peace and have taken part in numerous NATO exercises and other deployments near Russia ever since, even though Russia too is a member of this partnership. There are also other NATO partnerships which expands its influence out even further. In the Euro-Atlantic area, the 29 NATO members also engage in relations with 21 partner countries around Europe, including Russia, through this partnership group called the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, which was established in 1997, a multilateral forum created to improve relations between NATO and non-NATO countries in Europe and those parts of Asia on the European periphery. Among those partners are 12 former Soviet republics and 3 Yugoslav nations, former Yugoslav nations. NATO is also developing relations with 7 countries in the southern Mediterranean rim through the Mediterranean Dialogue, which was initiated in 1994, and involving 7 non-NATO countries in the Mediterranean region. And there's also an Istanbul Cooperation Initiative launched in 2004, which involves 4 countries from the Gulf region, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, with 2 others, Saudi Arabia and Oman, also showing some interest. NATO also cooperates with a range of countries that are not part of the regional partnership frameworks. These are referred to as partners across the globe, and they include now Afghanistan, Australia, Colombia, Iraq, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, Mongolia, New Zealand, and Pakistan. At a joint White House news conference in March, President Trump said he had told visiting far-right Brazilian President Bolsonaro that he would possibly support a campaign to make Brazil a NATO ally. So the participation, influence and reach of NATO is global. It is undoubtedly sees itself as a global force, and in 2008 even signed a joint declaration on cooperation with the United Nations. So the forces, facilities and resources of NATO have increased considerably and continue to do so. Here, this is a list of the military exercises, NATO exercises and deployments near Russia in the years 2014-2015. So just in that 1 year, a number of NATO exercises and deployments. This isn't all of them, this is just a few. Right.
Bombing exercises.
Some of them are all, they're not all bombing, but they're about moving troops, they're about making sure that all the troops can contact each other. Interoperability, they call it.
Got it.
So there are over 3 million military personnel in NATO countries in 2018. The US contribution being the largest with over 1,300,000, and the number of US military exercises and events in Europe has been increasing over the last few years. In terms of military spending, in 2017, according to CIPRI, 7 of the highest spenders are members of NATO. The US ranked first, France ranked 6th, and the UK ranked 7th, Germany 9th, Italy 12th, Canada 14th, and Turkey the 15th. It's kind of new, yeah, and it's supposed to be in order to increase dialogue and so on. And Russia has been trying to get it, be a full member of NATO for a number of years, but they've always been blocked. Okay, so at the 2016 NATO summit in Warsaw, it was decided to enhance NATO's military presence in Eastern Europe, and since then 4 multinational groups, battle groups, have been formed. These are the US military events in Europe recently, some of them anyway, and you can see a lot of them are in the Baltic states, take place there, a lot in Poland and so on. With a total of approximately, this is the EU battle groups, now NATO battle groups, sorry, I'm talking about now. Those are the ones that are being established in Poland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. With a total of approximately 15,000 troops and 3,500 military vehicles, they've been deployed to these Baltic nations and Poland. And this is known as NATO Enhanced Forward Presence. And they are based in those countries that I mentioned, with various countries of NATO being the leaders of those particular battle groups. By 2016, Finland and Sweden had entered into another agreement, a host country agreement with NATO. This agreement enables NATO to store military equipment and transport military forces through Finland and Sweden in times of crisis. This may even include nuclear weapons. Also by 2016, Finland and Sweden had agreed to become part of NATO's STRATCOM Centre of Excellence. These so-called Centres of Excellence, Strategic Command Centres of Excellence, are spread over Europe. And here you can see the major centres for those. These are all centres which basically concentrate on one particular aspect of warfighting. And there's one in Riga in Latvia now. Riga is just one of the many STRATCOM centres of excellence established throughout Europe. A Finnish expert on strategic communication working on proactive preparedness and comprehensive security was seconded there, and in April 2017 Finland established its own Centre of Excellence in Helsinki for countering so-called hybrid threats. This, a lot of what we're going to be discussing, or what is being discussed, is to do with cyber warfare. And there's also this is the United States Cyber Command in STRATCOM. The US Strategic Command is situated, STRATCOM is situated in Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. It's, among other things, the Pentagon's Center for Information Warfare. And cyber warfare techniques are being developed not only to attack technical installations, but also to plant false information to be used as propaganda by governments, the media, and corporate interests. And NATO and Russia have accused each other of spreading false news to win over public opinion. Sweden is directly involved in at least one major US cyber war project, which is involved in hacking targeted computer systems and with the subsequent data interception, diversion, and tampering. This is increasing what used to be called Five Eyes, which was the original intelligence collaboration between the US, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. Just post-war, around the end of the Second World War, those intelligence services joined together. Now, as you can see, it's expanded out into a lot more than just 5. So all of the countries are being involved in basically in spying and exchanging information, intelligence information. Sweden in particular has become a major part of this collaboration. And they work together with the US and Britain in what's called comment or communications intelligence. It has a third-party agreement with the original Five Eyes group. There's also another role that Scandinavia has, and not only Scandinavia but others, as we'll see later, and that is intercepting messages that go through fiber optic cables. A lot of messages now, a lot of emails, a lot of electronic sources are now being sent through fiber optic cables. And it used to be satellites. Now it's more being replaced by fiber optics. In December 2013, the Norwegian newspaper Dagbladet reported that Norway was providing the NSA with tens of millions of communications every month, focusing on Russian politicians, military and energy targets in particular. Last year, the Finnish government also began discussing its own surveillance legislation aimed at part in gaining access to its new undersea cable system called Sea Lion, which will route internet traffic directly to Germany. Russian communications may also bypass Sweden through this route. So the NSA, although once they looked at Sweden for collaboration in this, they could tap into the fiber optic cable there. The new route may bypass that and go through Finland, so they're working with Finland in order to hook into that fiber optic too. Just to show how important these kind of things are, the Baltic Sea is seen by many as a major theatre in the new cyber warfare arms race. And that's the Sea Lion. That's the new fiber optic cable which runs from Helsinki to Germany that we mentioned. In June 2017, a spin-off of one of the NATO exercises, the Baltic Host, called Baltic Ghost, was held as an exercise in the cooperative response to cyber attacks. NATO's biggest cyber warfare exercise was an electronic defensive drill named Cyber Coalition 2018, which took place in Estonia, about 30 miles from Russia's border. The United States, Britain, Estonia and other allies have since offered their cyber capabilities to be part of all this as well. Just to show the key NATO and allied exercises in 2018, this is a list. It's not every single exercise is there, but these are the major ones. These are what they call the K ones. You can get this from the NATO website. So you can see here there's been a large number of military exercises held every year in Europe. The key NATO and allied exercises in 2018 included Unified Vision 18, which was a joint intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance exercise, Baltops, a maritime exercise led by the US with 20 allies, with 4,700 personnel, 44 ships and 60 air assets, Sabre Strike and so on. And of course there was also the so-called Trident Juncture exercise in 2018, one of the biggest exercises since the Cold War, where 50,000 participants from 31 NATO and partner countries operated. Won't go too much into all this. You can again look up these things on the web. Operation Atlantic Resolve was held in, well, there has been one ever since 2014, and it's basically an operation where military personnel but also equipment is shipped from the States into Europe, travels through Europe, up through Poland, and then into the Baltic states in this way here. So this happens, in fact it's happened early this year in 2019, and vehicles, an armoured brigade combat team in support of the latest Atlantic Resolve exercise arrived in January from Fort Riley in Kansas. And vehicles and equipment arrived by sea in Antwerp in Belgium, then moved by rail, barge, commercial line haul and military convoy to designated locations in Poland. By mid-February, these units were distributed across the region in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Poland. Another major exercise is called Anaconda, and this is a biggest ever joint military exercise last year, Anaconda 2018, held in Poland again in the summer, and the most ambitious since the end of the Cold War. This is a list of key NATO and Allied exercises for this year, and as you can see, the list is long. That's again only the key ones, not all of them are included. And these will include another Joint Warrior exercise, which is a UK-led exercise. It's basically ship-based. It works off the coast of Scotland. And in fact, the interesting thing about this one was that in 2016, the Joint Warrior exercise also included the first ever unmanned warrior component. This is basically about drones, the use of drones, and sea-based drones as well as air-based drones.
Sea-based drones?
Sea-based drones, yeah, ships that are controlled by robots, or remotely controlled. This was described by the Royal Navy as robot wars and includes the use of aerial and underwater drones. And there's more. There have been important recent developments regarding the militarisation of the European Union, which has established 18 of its own battle groups as part of the EU's developing common security and defence policy. In 2017, EU foreign and defence ministers agreed to establish a European command centre in Brussels, and an agreement on permanent structured cooperation in defence called PESCO was reached in 2017, June 2017, at the EU summit in Brussels. Contributions come from a coalition of member states, and each of the 18 battle groups consists of a battalion-sized force, 1,500 troops reinforced with combat support elements. I think this is partly as a response because a lot of the European Union is not trustworthy too much of NATO. It doesn't quite know where NATO is going. It sees NATO as being under complete control of the US, and it wants to make its own military presence. This is not a good sign. It's not a good sign. This decision came the day after the European Commission launched the European Defence Fund, which comprises of 5.5 billion euros per year to coordinate, supplement and amplify national investments in defence research. This was the first time that the EU had got really directly involved with military. I think you should know this. You may not have heard this news in the US or Russia even, but it's something that is really developing very strongly. And there are a lot of people now starting to wake up to this and starting to protest. A lot of academics won't take some of the money, but still, you know, it's happening. So these are the new arm badges for the EU battalions. And these battle groups are often described as a new standing army for Europe. The groups are intended to be deployed on the ground within 5 to 10 days of approval from the European Council. The deployments must be sustainable for at least 30 days, which could be extended to 120 days if resupplied. These are the missions and operations in 2018, so you can see they're already pretty active, already things are happening. And this is all part of the so-called Common Security and Defence Policy of the EU. So, and there is cooperation at the moment between the EU and NATO to share information and share assets, including space. You'll see that at the top of the list there. 34 projects adopted in 7 areas of collaboration with NATO, and one of those is space. So the European Union and has undertaken many civilian and military operations in several countries and will work with NATO as required. So there's a lot of provocation. That's one of the things I was mentioning. I mean, we hear a lot in the UK, and I guess you do too in the US, about Russian maneuvers, about what they're doing, moving troops around, flying aircraft. We're doing exactly the same, if not worse. We're bringing together all of these countries throughout Europe to face up along the borders of Russia. And one of those major installations is missile defence. A major provocation which comes from NATO and the United States. These military bases and missile sites along the borders of Eastern Europe are established in the name of so-called missile defence. NATO and the US have been planning for and developing military bases in Europe to support a missile defence system since 2002. And President Obama's European phased adaptive approach to missile defence was announced in 2009. And here we can see how these installations are lining up on the borders of Russia. It consists of, first of all, radar sites in Turkey, the UK and Norway, and Standard Missile 3, so-called Aegis Ashore sites in Romania. Romania was declared operational in 2016, and also in Poland, which is due to be established last year, but it's been delayed until 2020, and 4 ship-based Aegis interceptor systems hosted in Rota in southern Spain. The central command of the system is at the huge US base in Ramstein in Germany. There are also, so these are 3 of the NATO bases associated with that. One in Romania, Ramstein Air Base, and then the Turkish, hosted in Turkey, radar establishment. And this is the Aegis ship-based system deployed in the Mediterranean. They make these boats in Bath, Maine, which is some of you will know. And I think Bruce said, "Oh no, it's not one of these. It's not one of these that's being christened this week." So I'd like to point out that these bases are basically responsible in the end for the destruction of the INF Treaty, because it's these bases that have provoked Russia. And basically Russia's response was to try to respond to this by moving missiles close to their borders, and this has upset the United States. So both countries are accusing each other of cheating on the Intermediary Nuclear Force Treaty, the INF Treaty, and have now pulled out of that treaty. And it was that treaty which we fought so hard for in the 1980s, to remove thousands of short, medium-range missiles from Europe, US missiles from Europe, and that treaty is now gone. And we know that the US in particular is building a load more short-range nuclear missiles, so to be used this time as well, so-called low yield, that can actually be used in warfare. So things are looking pretty bad in Europe. I think there's a consequence of this, there is a build-up of a movement again starting in Europe. We needed this huge build-up in the 80s in order to get rid of those weapons. They were the ones, it was the people protesting about these things in Germany and elsewhere, and cruise missiles in Britain, that actually got Gorbachev and Reagan together to talk about getting rid of them. And now we will have to do the same, or perhaps even better than that, somehow or other. But this has got to be stopped. The other system which you'll know about is THAAD, the US High Altitude Area Defence System, and this is another short-range, medium-range system which is being introduced actually in the Pacific region mostly, in Japan, in Korea, and elsewhere. Guam, Taiwan are also future possibilities. Well, Guam's already there. So you can see that that lines up quite closely with the borders of China and also some of the borders of Russia too. Again, it's seen by Russia and China, of course, as an aggressive movement, whereas the US still claims it's a defensive system, defending against who they don't say, or they said originally it was against North Korea, but it's unclear as to North Korea has never threatened these countries as far as I know. It's clear that these existing installations and those planned for Japan and Taiwan are aimed at China, who has continuously objected to the implementation of these systems and recently even demanded a halt to the deployment in South Korea. And these missile defense systems require space components. You can see the bases. They're there for us to, we can see them. We can see where they are. But there's also a large number of satellites which are involved in using or involved in implementing missile defense. They detect, they track, and they target incoming missiles, as well as being used for for spying. So there is a space component. So overall, as Roots Action has said, Trump has evicted Russian diplomats, sanctioned Russian officials, put missiles practically on Russia's border, sent weapons into Ukraine, lobbied European nations to drop Russian energy deals, left the Iran agreement, torn up the INF Treaty, rejected Russia and China's offers on banning weapons in space and banning cyber war, expanded NATO eastward, added a NATO partner in Colombia, proposed adding Brazil, demanded and successfully moved most NATO members to buy significantly more weapons, splurged on more nukes, bombed Russians in Syria, overseen the largest war rehearsals in Europe in half a century, condemned all proposals for a European military and insisted that Europe stick with NATO. That's the situation at the moment. I think it's well summed up there. I don't know how much time I have left, but I did want to say a little bit about military uses of space, because that's obviously what we're about. Military has a number of uses for space. It uses it for surveillance, for communication, for global positioning, for missile targeting and guidance, for drone operations, and for missile defense systems, as we've said. And I think it's all of these coming together. It's easy to see military bases on the ground. You know where they are, you know what they do, more or less. You don't see satellites up in the sky. You see their ground-based systems that are associated with those, but they look a bit innocuous. There's no tanks, there's no guns, there's no army personnel. They're just these golf ball things which they use for communication. And all of this is to kind of go through what the US calls space, the US military, space superiority. They want to gain space through superiority through what's called situational awareness, being aware of everything that's around them in the environment of space and on Earth. So this involves spying on huge levels and interception of information and so on and so on. I haven't got time to go through all these. I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of... These are some of the installations that are used in this system in Sweden and Norway. And if Agneta was here, she'd go on about this for hours, but unfortunately she isn't. But the one in particular I wanted to mention, and I think that Will be going to, after this, he'll be going to Finland. And they have an exercise going on there called, what's it called? I've forgotten the name of it. But it's, no. Anyway, it will be centred on this place called Sodanklia in northern Finland, which is a space centre. It's an Arctic space centre. Here's the picture of it here. And what it does is it receives messages, it receives information, data from a European satellite system called Copernicus. And this Copernicus system has a number of Sentinel satellites which monitors the Earth. I think I'm running out of time, but it monitors the Earth environment. As you can see, it's kind of used swathes of information, and it goes on to collect those and pass them on to the European Space Agency and then to the European military operations. So it is part of a military system, and it's interesting that this particular exercise will be focused on Sodanklia at this time. It highlights the importance of space in the, as seen by the military. Another operation is called MUOS, which we've been involved in the global network. This is in Sicily. They have a receiving station there for the information. It's a global system. There are 4 of these ground-based systems around the world. We went to the one in Sicily and visited the people there objecting to it. It's called MUOS, the Mobile User Objective System, which is a UHF frequency SATCOM system for the US Department of Defense. And this is part, again, of a global data gathering system around the world for sucking up huge amounts of information. Also for plugging into all of these different communications systems around the world. Has its own ways of plugging into those systems by hacking, by gathering it from the fibre optic cables, but also through their own geostationary satellite systems, which passes on from one to the other. Here's the undersea cable network. And wherever those cables come to ground, in fact, even when they're underwater, submarines can actually lay on top of these cables and intercept them there as well. So there's no end to the kind of work that can be done here with the right kind of, or the wrong kind of engineers, I should say. They're also, of course, assisting with the drone operations, and Europe is being very much involved in that. I think I should stop, but I did want to mention this thing called Gilgamesh, which is an NSA geolocation platform called Gilgamesh. It can turn a virtual base tower transceiver attached to the bottom of a drone into a fake mobile phone receiver. This forces a target's mobile phone to connect without their knowledge and allows the mobile's precise location to be delivered. These systems can be attached to the bottom of a drone, and they will then simulate a base tower or transceiver. It looks like it's looks like it's one of those places where your mobile phone connects to. It will then get people to connect their phones to it, and it can get information from them without their knowledge and pass that on to the NSA or whoever wants it. And this information, as you can see, there's a network. It goes from to Ramstein, Germany, and then there's a direct fibre optic cable connection to Krisch Air Force Base where the drones are flown from. So huge connection with space operations there. The UK also has operations in Britain. We went there last year to Croughton, which is the top right-hand side, which is a huge intelligence base which is being expanded that costs hundreds of billions to gather and help sort all this information out. Menwith Hill is the second one down. That's near where I live. That's the NSA spy base I mentioned earlier. And then there's also one in Cornwall called Bude, at a place called Bude, GCHQ, who work with NSA. And so on and so on. So it goes on. These are the Croughton connections where we were last year. We were told about all of this kind of stuff that's going on. There's direct fibre optic link with the Camp Lemonnoir in Djibouti, and the drone activity that goes on there. And if I can also mention this thing called Argus. Okay, I won't mention it. There is a resistance, though. Some people, you may have seen this Project Maven on artificial intelligence for the military. People working in Google have actually resigned over it, and they've cancelled the program. Well, at least I think they've cancelled the program. It's never quite clear. And then there was the first space protest here, a citizen-led exploration group, the Autonomous Space Agency Network. They launched a weather balloon in 2017 with a tweet which was directed at Trump. I did want to finish on this. The message says, "Look at that, you son of a bitch." And that's an interesting message. It's in reference to the Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who I think spoke at a Global Network meeting back in Florida sometime. Is that right?
Spoke at a protest at
Cape Canaveral on.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was the sixth man to walk on the moon. He once said that when you view the Earth from space, you develop a global consciousness, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty, he said. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch." That's the message.